Hello, thanks for joining us today. We're going to pause and wait while everyone logs in. Hello, and thank you for joining. We'll get started in just a moment. Hello, this is Leah Freeberg from Fluke Reliability, and thank you for joining us for this Best Practices webinar. You probably know Fluke is a test tool provider, and you may also know that we produce some of the industry's favorite reliability tools, from infrared cameras to vibration meters. But you may not know that many of the measurements that our tools collect now flow automatically into EAM systems of record. It happens via a framework that we call Fluke Connect. Our goal at Fluke Reliability is to better connect asset management data and teams with asset management systems to drive connected knowledge. And of course, that knowledge depends greatly on best practices in condition-based maintenance. So that's why this series of webinars explores reliability maintenance strategies. And that's why we feature speakers from a variety of expert backgrounds. Before the presentation, we have a few housekeeping items to go over. Today's session is being recorded, so the phone lines will be muted to minimize background noise. We will save time after the presentation for your questions. If questions come up during the presentation, you are welcome to use the questions feature on GoToWebinar to submit comments as we go. So take a minute now to find the questions tool in the dashboard. At the end of the talk, I will share as many of your questions as time allows for our presenter to answer. If we have unanswered questions at the end, we will follow up with written answers. If you'd like to receive the slides from today's presentation, please let us know during the survey that will appear at the end of today's session. So please don't hang up until the survey appears and you've answered the questions. We'd also be happy to send you a certificate of attendance after today's webinar. You'll see a question on the survey about getting a certificate. Answer yes, and we'll send one to you. Lastly, a recording of this webinar in full will be available on the Excelix.com website within a day or two. All right, that's it for housekeeping, and now for the main event. Today, we are very pleased to have with us Dr. Klaus Blache, Director of the Reliability and Maintainability Center and Research Professor at the College of Engineering at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. He'll be presenting on how to lead and maintain reliability in a crisis. Klaus has directed the RMC for the last 12 years since retiring from Cadillac. He has more than 34 years of industry experience in various areas of manufacturing, continuous improvement, processes, and people, including lean manufacturing, reliability and maintenance, competitive analysis, continuous improvement tools and techniques, new facility planning and implementation, industrial engineering, ergonomics, and change management. Klaus is also a past 2-year chairman of SMRP, the Society of Maintenance and Reliability Professionals, and helped initiate the organization. His most recent book is The Relativity of Continuous Improvement, Learning How to Work on What Matters. Welcome, Klaus, and thank you for being with us today.
Oh, thanks, Leah.
Very, very good to have you. If you'll forward to the next slide, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the RMC?
Yeah, first, hi, everybody. As Leah mentioned, I'm Klaus Blache, and thanks for joining me today. If you're not familiar with the RMC, we're not going to get into everything, but at a real high level, that we do everything from assessments, benchmarking, best practices, R&M certification, helping change workforce culture to becoming problem eliminators, training summer student interns, and more. So if you have interest, look us up on the website or contact me directly.
Indeed. And Klaus, with the RMC located at the university itself, you've had an active part in planning for continued operations under COVID, haven't you?
Absolutely. Yeah, both the University of Tennessee and the RMC, have been transitioning to this new normal, and we'll continue to I'll say accommodate as needed for ongoing success. We're all going through the same challenges and cautiousness. So.
Indeed, indeed. If you'll forward to the next slide, I think we're starting with a poll.
Yeah.
All right. So audience, this is your chance. I'm just going to launch the poll here.
Yeah.
There we go. So this is your chance, audience, to weigh in. If you've maximized your screen, I'm going to suggest that you reduce it back down so that you can access the radio buttons. But we'd like to know, based on how it was before COVID-19, how effective is your business today? So you only get to choose one answer, and obviously these are sort of guesses, but do you feel like your business is at least 20% less productive? Is it slightly less productive? Is it about the same, or is it actually doing better? And we ask these so that we have a feel for what you as the audience are going through, and this informs how Klaus will present today. So we'd like to get, at least half, if not 75% of the audience voting today. So we're a little over half at this point. So just give us your best estimates based on conditions, end of last year. How effective is your business in comparison today? Less productive, almost the same, or actually doing better, depending on what industry you're in. So it looks like we have just about all the votes in. I'm going to close, and I'm going to share the results now. So it looks like about 36% of you say that you're at least 20% less productive, and 31% are slightly less productive. So the majority are on the less productive side. 26% are about the same, and 8% are doing better. Klaus, how does that jive with what you've been seeing and talking to people about?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I've seen in a lot of different places, and it's always good to see that some people are actually doing better.
Yeah,
Either they were there digitally, or sometimes times like this force you to get there a little faster.
that is very true. That is very true. Well, I'm going to turn the screen back over to you, and you can take it away.
Okay, thank you. Okay, what we want to talk about in today's discussion, again, how to lead and maintain reliability in a crisis. Many things have changed quickly. So, as reliability and maintenance activities continue, staying to or adhering to the new, we'll call it pandemic prompted standardized best practices are even more critical, obviously, because of the consequences. And we're going to touch on 4 areas. One is, just a little bit of background. I just think it's always interesting to look at our history, and wherever there's a crisis, great things have been accomplished. And then some challenges and opportunities of the before and after. Again, realizing, that we can't do things the same way, and don't be afraid to do them differently. And then a lot of the slides I'll put up, I'm not going to go through the entire slide because they're taken from a lot of different places, but I provide all the references of all the places where I got the slides, and a lot of them tie into 40, 50, 60-page reports, so it's a nice resource to go out and look at stuff, and hopefully, something you can use. And then we'll talk a little bit about the new normal and becoming resilient, and then a little bit about leading in these times of crisis. And COVID-19, some have termed this as a black swan event. So I had looked it up. I kind of knew what it was, but what's the formal definition, right? So it's an unpredictable event that is beyond what is normally expected of a situation, and has potentially severe consequences. Black swan events are characterized by their extreme rarity and their severe impact. And I thought this last point here was unique, in that it says, and the widespread insistence that they were obvious in hindsight. So it gets back to why weren't we ready for this? Now, I think many are still just trying to figure it out and saying, just looking up and saying, what the heck happened? So I think it's to me, it's what I'm seeing everybody react to is a little more like the Wizard of Oz and Dorothy here on the right talking to her dog Toto and saying, I'm feeling we're not in Kansas anymore. Well, we are definitely not in pre-COVID time anymore. Nothing really looks the same. And whenever there's a crisis, some will just be uncomfortable, or frightened. Some will want to simply return to a safe workplace or continue to work from home because they feel safer. And some will take what they learned during the crisis, and I think more so important is they seek out what's needed for them to learn so they can come out better individually as an organization. And I think that's where everybody needs to be. I mean, who would have thought, half a year ago that I would go look into the bank like this early on and, say, I'm here to put some money in, right? And shortly here, I'm probably 5 weeks to 2 months overdue getting a haircut. So I've got a choice of, going to get a haircut by a person in a mask while I'm probably wearing a mask, or I can let my wife cut my hair and she's offered, both give some angst, but these are all decisions we got to make along with what we do at work and as well as our daily lives. And, on the right, everybody's going the more teaching and doing things online and virtually, just like this webinar, whether it's a Zoom meeting, a WebEx, or something Microsoft, but we did our first virtual boot camp with students going to internships this summer with multiple companies. And so again, everybody's figuring it out as they need to going forward. If you go back into a longer time in history, you see what's happened historically. And I've been through several things, not quite this bad, but I remember, I think it was around 1999, we had I call it the fake Y2K crisis, the computer clock issue, the clock's not going to work right on the computer and it'll mess up everything, and that was, it was really a nothing, and really the only result was a lot of IT people that were hired lost their jobs during that time. Then around 2001 was anthrax. You had to be careful not to spill sugar, when you're getting coffee because people would panic. Then the SARS virus in 2003. And you go way back early on in the early history, in the 1600s was the bubonic plague in England. And you look at that forced Cambridge University to close. And Sir Isaac Newton, before he was a sir, he had to go home, and he was sitting in a garden watching apples fall off a tree. And look what happened. We got the universal law of gravity, and good things got learned out of that. Basketball was invented, way back in the late 1800s to give athletes something to do inside during the cold. But it was really during the recession in 1894 that Dr. Naismith asked Spalding to design a better basketball, and the rest is history around basketball. It was an unemployed Philadelphia man that saw a game that was somewhat similar that he liked and he thought he could do better. And he started a new game in 1935 called Monopoly. Rocky Road ice cream in 1929, Dreyer's ice cream, because of the depressions, they wanted to give people something to smile about. Well, I'm sure they're still smiling, because they're still selling that ice cream, and I like it too. But getting a little closer to current times, after the financial crisis of 2008, and to me that was personal because that's when I decided to take early retirement and go to the university. But there were a lot of young people and people looking for jobs, and it was a tough time also. And some of the people that might have taken desk jobs did other things. And guess what? Out of that time came Instagram, Uber, Airbnb, WhatsApp. And I think this pandemic is going to cause similar things. There's going to be a struggle, there's a crisis, but good things will happen as a result of this also. What's tough right now is that really more than 70% of the jobs can't be done off-site. Some of us are fortunate that we can do things remotely, but really more than almost 40% of the workforce are in small businesses. They're the ones that provide those services, and they've got to be at work to make it happen. And if you include some of the medium businesses, now it's over half the United States. And then you throw in the production workers and maintenance. And if it doesn't get better, in let's say in the longer run, it's going to drive a faster acceleration of automation, and that causes more issues as far as unemployment. And so again, we need to look at, how do we handle all those people that don't have that choice? I'm going to touch on several select examples and show a lot of different sources, but as I said, there's a lot more information here than we have time for, and the sources give you 60, 70 pages worth of information. So if you have that interest in those areas, please do go look. Some of the sources are like the Manufacturing Leadership Council at the National Association of Manufacturers have done a good job in putting together some guides. Ford has a 60, 70 page guide that's public that people can look at. And just some of the things that's been talked about, I think everywhere is the, is the 24-hour COVID testing results, daily online employee checks before you come into work. UT is doing that also. There's a daily check on an app that we use that before everybody comes to work, they have to self-answer some questions to get approval to come to work every day. And masks are being worn, no touch temperature scans. Again, everybody's wearing masks. If safe distancing is not a capable thing, let's say in a plant, then a lot of places are providing face shields, like safe maintenance has to work close to a production worker and so on, or from an assembly line, they can't split them apart far enough. So additional tests of safety are being done. And again, some are putting more time between production shifts so people can have more time and not running into each other. And all the schools are having to look at the same thing. Ford workers are provided, and I don't know if it's everywhere in some places, but they're looking at a watch that beeps when workers get too close, whether it's a watch or a wristband. I've seen different applications. Adding more portable sinks, more hand sanitizers, no touch faucets, soap dispensers, all the things that will help and make people seem safer. But there will be hiccups because it's a global supply chain issue. Mercedes started, but had to stop, after running short of parts. Volkswagen had similar issues because their suppliers needed more time to get up and running. But you got to start. You got to get it going. On the assembly lines, this is a Fiat Chrysler example. It's just one of many in the different companies. You're going to see a lot more plastic curtains, again, to separate people strictly for safety. And again, staggering start times. But the key point is really the message on top that an effective startup will require detailed understanding, teaching, coaching, patience from all of us, because there has to be a significant amount of time and patience to learn new habits. And that's really what it comes down to, is learning new habits. At Toyota, and I'm going to read this slowly because this is an important statement, what employees will find upon the return is that virtually nothing is the same. Entering the plant is different. Working processes on the assembly line are different. Meetings with team leaders are different. Taking breaks is different. Eating lunch is different. Everything will be different. And the challenge is that you're going to have to break everybody's habits to start these new daily best practices. I mean, we all know restaurants, if the few that are starting to open, it's different. Even in the cafeterias, if they're open at work, you're looking at markers on the floor, you're looking at reconfigured rooms, you're looking at plexiglass, so at least you can sit kitty corner like this, with plexiglass in between. And as it says here on the right, the first day and a half, or let's say 2 days, we'll actually be training to recalibrate and again adjust those habits as best as possible. Airlines, obviously, they're really down on flights and they're struggling and had a few tough starts. But I heard yesterday on the news that at least one airline, because they're requiring people to wear masks, and some people are refusing to wear masks, that if you refuse to wear a mask, you may get put on a no-fly list for that airline. So again, the rules will be different. Apple's opening their stores, obviously, but again, face coverings and temperature checks are required. Again, another source here that tied back into the early one has got a list of a bunch of stuff. There's nothing magical here, but again, some of the most common best practices communicated by the National Association of Manufacturers. And again, you can read all the fine print around that. And they've divided a lot of their stuff into several categories. And I'm just going to mention some of these, and again, the references are on the bottom. A site access to mitigate exposure. Again, eliminate all visitor access. And what, are visitors going to be allowed in, or is it just going to be the essential services like is mentioned here, maintenance and the service technicians? Or are you going to allow third-party visitors, and then what checks are they going to go through? The self-certifying questionnaires, then the visitors will also have to do that. Are you going to do temperature screening? I know large assembly plants are doing temperature screening before you're allowed to come into work outside the plant. Some examples of workstation measures to promote social distancing. Many of those have already been discussed. The 6 feet apart is pretty much a standard for everybody. Slowing down production lines so people can be spaced farther apart. Again, the facial covering. If you can't, then you get a plexiglass mask if you're doing maintenance or something that has to get closer. For people in the office or administrative work, they may get personalized keyboard covers. So you're always taking your keyboard cover along, regardless of what you have to do in the plant, and if you're not carrying a laptop around. And I think an important one is number 13 on the bottom. You can do all the cleaning, a lot of it at night and so on in a lot of companies, but this is being done so that people see the cleaning and they feel safer at work. It says scheduling daily cleaning crews to come through facilities during the day rather than at night to show employees that safety measures are being taken. So it's not just doing the cleaning, the employees have to feel safe coming back to work. On facilities and traffic management, again, cafeterias, break rooms, we talked about closing, touchless appliances wherever possible. Some toilets and sinks will have to be closed. And so how does that impact, timing and so on? Some doors will be propped open to eliminate touching. Some doors will be closed to eliminate easy access. So again, all that's got to be looked at. Lots and lots of more visual controls on what the best practices are. Increasing use of radios, text messaging, and so on. Time clocks are usually a crowded area, in production plants. And so again, other technologies will need to be looked at, whether it's something tied to the cell phone, the wristband that some of them are passing out, or tied to the watch, or staggering start times, or additional time clocks. And, obviously the easiest one is just social distancing markers, but again, that could be some pretty big lines. Also, what are you going to do as far as getting more of the stuff out there? We're going to be looking at getting, more hands-free sanitizing dispensers, and we'll probably put some of these into our teaching labs, as demonstrations, that are pedal operated, reduce cross-contamination. Again, you can put any of your preferred gel or liquid in here and so on. So there's a website on the bottom if you're interested, take a look. Shift and team design, ensure that each worker is only interacting with a very limited number of coworkers. As things are opening up, I see people starting to play tennis again, and I see certain groups meeting because they've kind of decided that, well, these are the 4 or 5 people that I always interact with, and we're all following the same safety practices. So we're all pretty safe, and it's kind of taking that mentality to work and saying that let's kind of figure out how we can work in different teams so the same teams always work together, and that minimizes the potential spread of anything. Again, increasing time between shifts. How do you divide workers within the same shift into smaller teams to avoid a lot of unnecessary contact? And really every handoff in a workplace needs to be evaluated. And then everybody's got their rules on illness or diagnosis response. So again, how do you trace and track if you do have an issue? What's going to be communicated to the employees to help them feel safe, but at the same time, you've got to maintain the privacy of anybody that does have an issue. So I know at the university, they're doing that by designated areas and protecting the privacy of the people and so on. So you've got to work with your HR and make sure that's being done correctly. Essential travel policies. Pretty much everybody's saying they're driving if at all possible. And a lot of places are saying now use your own car instead of a rental car if you feel safer using that. And again, you've got to commute the protocols and so on to people, your customers, if they're expecting to come to your place of work, or if you're going somewhere, you need to find out. Let's say if we're going to do some training, the first question we're going to ask is, what's your safety protocol and what practices are you following? Because here's what we're comfortable with, and here's what we're doing. You need to have those kind of discussions. The next one they titled Returning Non-Essential Workers. I probably would have called this one Returning Non-Essential to on-site daily production workers. Non-essential doesn't sound that good, but it's really non-essential to daily production. So companies are determining, who can return to work, who should return to work, who can work remotely for now or maybe forever. That could be based on job function, age, health, and so on. So everybody's looking at those practices. The University of Tennessee, like a lot of universities, is spending an enormous amount of time with dozens of committees and almost daily meetings and putting together safety plans, health plans. The students are coming back August 19th, so a tremendous amount of planning going into that. But we also have a Center for Industrial Services that works with companies in manufacturing throughout the state of Tennessee, and that information is public, and other states have those kind of agencies also. But they've put together a real nice return to work and recovery guide. That's roughly about, again, 60 pages. So there's a link to that. If you're interested, you're welcome to have that. Again, just examples of some of the things in there. This is the table of contents of that Center for Industrial Services guide put out by that group at the Institute of Public Service at the University of Tennessee. So I think they did a really good job on that. And it's got stuff on operations restart, reintegration, before work resumes, what do you do? Importance of supply chain, what type of mask, and so on. So again, take a look if that interests you. Are you going to ask a question here, Leah? What is this here?
I am. I'm going to give your voice pause and give the audience a chance to chime in here again. So same as before, if you have your screen maximized, shrink it back down so that you can answer this question for us. So Klaus has just put a whole lot of stuff up in front of us to think about. So what do you think your biggest challenge is in the next 3 months? Is it getting the business running effectively again? Is it helping the workforce feel safe at work? Is it scaling up to more digital technologies, telecommuting, or is it big picture issues like the supply chain and opening up? So obviously more than one of these may apply. Select the one that you think is the biggest challenge, because clearly this is a significant change and impact on everyone. So as you're thinking through all this, which is the biggest challenge? Is it getting the business running effectively, helping the workforce feel safe, scaling up to more digital, or bigger picture issues like supply chain? I'd like to get a few more people casting their votes, and then we'll see how the group feels about this. All right, I'm going to close the poll here in just a moment. We've got almost 60% of the audience voting. I appreciate that. And then I'm going to share the results. And again, 33% is worried or challenged by getting the business running effectively. And then the same in helping the workforce feel safe. And you could only choose one. So those two were probably the top two for folks. And then scaling up to more digital, and then bigger picture issues like supply chain. Klaus, are there any surprises here for you?
No, I think it was just I just want to get a feel here where everybody was at. And I think this is going to be a very personalized answer based on where you're at technology wise and what specifically you do as your business. So I mean, even for the RMC, we were moving to a little more digital. Well, obviously this accelerated that for us. We have the resources and different computer systems at school to do that kind of teaching. But at the same time, our certifications, we look at implementation focused certification, so some hands-on training is needed. So it's always like, where do you go next and how do you handle that? So everybody has to answer that individually. So no big surprises.
Well, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Carry on.
Okay, the new normal and becoming resilient. This looks a little bit like a doormat. That was intentional. So look for that. But it doesn't say welcome, but stepping into work or at home, will never be the same. Maybe a few things. Just a heads up. OSHA's kind of they dropped a few things early in the in the year to kind of say, you know, don't worry about this stuff, and now they're stepping things up again, and they got 2 revised enforcement policies for coronavirus. I mean, first they're going to increase their in-person inspections at all types of workplaces, and they're going to continue to prioritize the COVID-19 inspections and so on. So that there's some more detail behind that, but that's probably the gist of the first part. The second part is it's revising its previous enforcement policy for recording the cases, and now they're saying they all have to be recorded. Now, recording a coronavirus illness doesn't mean that the employee has violated anything, but I think the tough part is going to be is that OSHA guidance emphasizes that employers must make reasonable efforts based on the evidence, et cetera, to the employer to ascertain whether a particular case of coronavirus is work-related. It's going to be tough, so I'd say if you haven't looked at that, Google it. Have your safety and medical people look at that, because those kind of things are going to come up. What history's shown us a lot of things, and one of the things they've shown for sure is that once these kind of things happen, a lot of things don't go back the way it used to be. Most of us hope that it's going to end in a few months. It won't, that fast. We don't know. Everybody's waiting. What's going to happen in the fall? Are they going to have a shot for that, and how well is it going to work? And so it's going to be a lot of wait and see over the next year and a half. And what most of us consider normal, has already fundamentally shifted, and a lot of it is not going to shift back. And as it states here, after 9/11, there was all kinds of security stuff put in place, cybersecurity, government surveillance, that hasn't gone away. And similarly, the COVID pandemic's already accelerated a bunch of trend changes, and a couple of these listed here: the online learning we talked about, working from home, different ways to provide services, consumer goods, a lot more online ordering of everything. And once the critical mass, as it states here, gets used to doing it a certain way, it's going to be tough to change your behavior back, because they'll find out some of this is a little bit easier. I think what's also going to be significant is it says about 16% of the U.S. workforce, and more so in Europe, where there's dual income households, they can't really easily go back full time to work, meaning if they're not telecommuting, unless something happens with childcare. It's not just the university students, it's also the K through 12, with everybody shutting down school systems and doing stuff online. If they have to provide some kind of child care or have somebody do this, it's going to be tough to go back to work physically. So these are all things that we didn't have to worry about before. I think there's already been, and there will be, a very serious look at what's our global supply chain and what should be elsewhere and what should be at home. I mean, some of the basic things like rare earth minerals, the PPE shortages we had, some of the need for specific medical equipment, key pharmaceuticals. I think there's going to be definitely shifts in supply chain and where that's going to be done as we go forward, so this kind of stuff doesn't happen again, at least to this extent. And I think the key statement is the last one on the bottom. It says, for the first time in modern manufacturing history, demand, supply, and workforce availability are affected globally at the same time. So a lot of issues. It's not just a health crisis. It's an everything crisis. As I mentioned, Ford's got a pretty nice guidebook, and again, you can follow the links to get there and download that. Their guidebook, it's saying 60, 70 pages. I think it's exactly 64 pages. And I was glad to see that some of the guides are mentioning managing stress and anxiety, because I think the emotional or psychological toll is growing and will be as important, if not more important, to address than just the physical disruptions and the distancing. This is tough on people. So a little bit on leading in crisis and what to focus on going forward. There's probably been 5 words that have been used the most, in the last half year. We used 3 or 4 of these at the university long before I saw them at McKinsey. McKinsey been publishing some good stuff around Corona and businesses and so on. So I've been following a lot of their stuff, and they did a little definition and guidance on these 5 words. But like I said, 3 or 4 of these we've already used at the university long before they saw the McKinsey stuff. So I'll call these the 5 most used words going forward for the virus. The first is resolve. The need to determine the scale, pace, how fast you're going to go, the depth of action, how deep do I need to change the organization, and that's just not the business. It could be at the state level and also different areas. And I think people are going to have to really rethink their business models. And as it's quoted here, as one CO told us, "I know what to do. I just need to decide whether those who need to act share my resolve to do so." People are wanting to work safe, as they should, and businesses are working hard to put in place safe practices to make that happen. But at the end of the day, the business needs to be profitable, or it isn't sustainable, and all of that doesn't matter, because at the end there's going to be more issues. So it's always that fine balance, and it's going to be tough. Resilience. The health crisis is really turning into a financial crisis because of all the uncertainty, and people don't like to work in uncertainty, and that's not going to change for a while. And again, people are waiting for what's going to happen in the fall. How fast are we going to get a vaccine? And then kind of keeping an eye on it when it does come out. Is it working? And really the shock of people's livelihoods and so on could or will be impacted, as this goes forward. And so again, what happens next in the next, I'd say between now and the next 3-4 months is going to be critical, even more so than this first half year. Okay, the next one is return. The weakest point in the chain will determine the success or otherwise of a return to rehiring, training, etc. And then again, what happens in the fall? Everybody's following the safe priorities. They're again trying to change habits, because that's the most important thing, changing habits. Or I'd say in general, people are pretty good about wearing masks, but not everybody. And how do you handle that? And that's going to be a tough call. It's one thing to do it at work. How do you handle it socially out in the public? If you're at a store and 2/3 of the people wearing masks and a third don't want to, and aren't doing the social distancing. So I think those are potential issues. When you're working with suppliers, it's not just your direct suppliers, because it's a global issue. All your suppliers, you need to look at it really as a big picture now, what's going on globally and who's all impacted. And what I see here, we talked a lot about changing habits. Historically, at least North America facilities in general, have not been that good at instilling daily best plant floor practices. It's probably the best way to say it. And the question is, are we going to do better here in the long run? I think for the short run, most people at work will follow the best practices because of the consequences of the risk involved if they don't. But is that sustainable, and what's going to happen over time, especially if the virus starts to dissipate some and things get better? How good will we or the workforce be at sustaining best practices, for COVID-19? Okay, reimagination. And as it states here, a shock of the scale will create a discontinuous shift in the preferences, expectations of individuals. And you can read all the rest of the stuff on consumers, what they're buying and so on. But I think the important statement is the one that's kind of bulleted on the bottom. Supply chain safety and availability will outweigh globalization efficiencies. It's going to be much more important that we have a solid supply chain and availability than just trying to go globalize for low cost. And so I think there's going to be significant changes in parts of the supply chain. And again, we'll never look at some of those things the same way, I think, again. And as mentioned a little bit, what I've witnessed over many years is that people have a difficult time during and when they have to work with uncertainty. And that's not going to change for some time. But I think at the same time, people, if they have a mission and they get focused around something, they're good at uniting around a crisis. They're good at finding out what quickly really works, and they're willing to try different approaches. But policies will be put in place to do that. But this new normal is going to be so different. You really need a workforce that's flexible and willing to change as we learn more. And I think those companies that have a really good continuous improvement process and have a workforce that already does that is going to come out a lot better. And that's a little bit about what's trying to be said on the next slide, is the importance of continuous improvement. That some of the words are by McKinsey, I won't read through it, essentially says those companies that are resilient and have good continuous improvement processes do much better when there's issues than those that do not. And it points again to many other presentations that I've given on plant floor continuous improvement and developing a plant full of problem eliminators. Do you have a thriving continuous improvement process? How robust is it? Do you have small teams really wanting to make a difference? And again, those companies that have that, I think, will fare better coming out of this virus. And as it states there on the bottom, it will not be enough for many companies to tweak their business model. They will need to rethink it. And you've got to decide, where's your business at? You just need to tweak your model, or do you really need to look at things totally differently? Kind of winding down in a couple slides. In the last week and a half, we're on the weekend, my wife and I were looking at a couple specials, and one of the news clips Bon Jovi was on, and he was kind of writing songs on the fly, and I thought this was appropriate. One of them was, if you can't do what you do what you can. And he was actually, in addition, taking music lines, and I can't remember if it was a kindergarten or first grade class, but again, it shows how much the kids really pick up. And I think this generation is going to have they're going to feel that significant impact of what's going on right now. These young kids, kindergartners and first graders, were writing lines and sending it to him online so he could play the music. And they were words like, I know my parents are trying their best, but I know they're really stressed. These are the lines that these young kids are doing, and so on. So I think that says it all. But I think as we go forward, we need to individually look at how do we all focus on actions that deliver results. We may all have to do our job a little differently. It's not just about what you like, but about what do we need to do both individually and organizationally to be successful. So people need to think about not how do I do my job remotely. It should be how do I deliver results regardless of what I have to do. And so it's really a different continuous improvement mentality. Well, I thought it'd be good to end up with a slide on cabin fever. My wife goes to the store most of the time. When I do go out and see people and do stuff, as we're going to the store, I see everybody's a little more edgy, more short-tempered at stores, and a little more grumpy maybe. They're a little tired of being locked up, and you got to keep telling yourself it's just the COVID response due to cabin fever. And you're probably there too, so take a deep breath before you respond, because you're probably there also. So I'll end up by saying be safe, be kind, and good luck as you're working towards your new normal. So Leah, I'm going to give it back to you.
Yep, that is a good closing note, and I'm going to share some of the questions that have already come in, and I want to encourage everyone on the line to type in more questions now, as Klaus has saved this time for us to do some Q&A. So first one is about, again, what normal means. And we ran that first question, that first poll question about how effective is your business today compared to before COVID, right? And someone asked,
Yeah.
what does that mean? What does getting the business running effectively even mean? Because their company won't come back to normal until the demand for their products and services returns, right?
Yeah, I'd look at it two ways. One is, can they wait to survive that, or
Mm,
do they have to totally rethink their business? I mean, there's some businesses that are saying, here's what we used to do, but we're taking half the business and doing something totally differently. Or is there something that we can rethink, that we can offer that people need as a result of this coronavirus?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Because if everybody's waiting to just have it come back as usual, then that may work or may not work, but depending how sound your individual company is financially. How long can you wait to respond?
Yeah. Do you think there's
And
going to be a lot of retooling happening? So a lot of changing of the actual output?
I think so in many cases. I mean, the ones that are going to be hurt the most, I think, are going to be like maybe the tertiary suppliers, the small suppliers.
Mm-hmm.
That are the major suppliers can probably handle a lot of it because they're usually working with a lot of different, let's say if it's automotive, a lot of different companies. But if it's one small company that's counting on, they make one part, tied to one car, and that keeps them in business, and all of a sudden they don't need that, what do they do instead? And they probably can't survive a long wait, so again, remember, that's half the businesses in the United States, whether it's
Yeah,
entertainment, restaurants, or small manufacturing.
yeah. How is the university addressing students that are concerned about participating in in-person classes? Does a public institution have an obligation to provide a virtual or online option?
The well, I think any student, I mean, it hasn't come up that anybody wants to go totally online, but the classes could be taken totally online if they choose to do that. The way we're going to do it at the university is when the students come back in August, they're going to do a week live and a week online. But could they come in and listen to it online? Sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I think we see more of the other. That everybody really wants to come back full time live.
Yeah.
It's more the
Yeah.
other push. Yeah.
This next question is more about manufacturing and in particular about environments that were designed for long daily hours, long shifts, long day rotations. How do you adjust for that?
Are we talking about like people that are working 12 hours a day? I'm not quite sure I
Right.
understand the question.
Right. So is there, so during in this new worker safety environment, is there a forced change on long shifts? Is there any kind of safety concern about working those longer shifts?
Well, if you're still working the same amount of hours, I don't think it's going to make a difference, right? Who's to say when you're more at risk, right? Is it because you're at work, 3 12-hour days, or whether you're coming in shorter hours for 5 days, right? It's really
Hmm.
back to the best practices and how many hours are you at work. But I think the more you can isolate to smaller groups, having less transfers of things that other people are touching and so on. Maybe long shifts are better if you're always working with the same half a dozen people. So.
Yeah, we have some questions in about supply chain because indeed there is a lot of concern about plants that have had to suspend operations because of spare part non-availability, and obviously that's specific to maintenance there. And you called that out. Do you see, and you call that remanufacturing other things? What do you see as the best tactics that people are deploying? You said, make it a security and availability priority versus a cost. Can you get more specific?
Well, I would say, first of all, everybody knows or should know what their critical parts are, and
Mm-hmm.
and they should have more than at least they should have at least have a backup supplier in case there's issues, and they ought to look to see where it's coming from and how affected are those areas. And as a minimum, they ought to be looking at getting a 3D printer. I mean,
Nice.
there's so many things that can be done with 3D printing. It's not your end all solution for everything, but a lot of times you can make a part that's a pretty good band-aid to get you there until you can get that part.
That is a great suggestion. Here's an interesting question. Do you think there will be a change in the way that the industry looks at reliability engineering due to the changes from this pandemic?
I don't think reliability engineering in itself changes so much. I mean, the philosophies are still the same. It's really a matter of it gets back more how do you. It's not just reliability, but it's reliability and maintenance or maintainability. Is how do you teach those skills when half of that I'll say are hands-on skills, right? How do you teach precision maintenance? How do you get into those kind of things? You can do some of that by video, some of that with maybe virtual glasses, things like that. But at some point, you really learn by touching the stuff, and so on. So I think some of that's going to come back, but I don't think philosophically it's going to change things around, reliability or the concepts around there.
I think the person is asking, do you think it will become more important? Obviously, the root benefit of reliability, meaning that you have less firefighting, less panic, fail
Oh, okay.
troubleshooting,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. I can definitely see that.
Okay.
That as we go forward, the risk involved. I mean, it's just like the people that do a high level. Let's say 75% of North America does too much reactive maintenance. Well, my data shows that if you do more reactive maintenance, you've got more safety issues, just because
Right.
logically it
Right.
makes sense because you're putting people at risk. Well, this is pretty much the same question. As you get more proactive, if you're doing your condition-based monitoring, if you maybe get some machine intelligence and you're now doing prescriptive maintenance where it's telling you what to do when, you minimize the interventions, well, of course you're going to have less issues. So I think if that's what was being asked, yes, I agree with that.
That is what was being asked, and I think that there's a little bit of an ask there about as a reliability community and as leaders, how do we get that message across that this is the time, this is the hour to increase our reliability emphasis?
That's been a lifelong challenge of mine. I write 2 articles a month for Efficient Plant, and one article I wrote, I think it was near the end of last year, was the RCM paradigm shift. It's kind of saying the data's been there for decades as saying this is the right thing to do. What's it going to take to get leadership there and everybody else to help follow those practices? And it's part of that plant floor continuous improvement. I mean, I'm working with teams right now and groups of plant managers to implement long-term change within plants to teach them how to not just change cultures, but to ask the right questions to get there and then sustain those cultures. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a long-term process, and
Mm-hmm.
not just saying, oh, we're going to do proactive maintenance. It's the same reason TPM works or doesn't work. And why do you never get to autonomous maintenance and the final step on that? Well, it's a culture thing. Why does, only RCM work sometimes? Why does I see 70% or more of lean manufacturing fails? It doesn't mean it fails. You get less than 50% of the real benefits that you can get out of it because people don't instill the required continual learning, the mentoring of the plant floor. It's that I'll call it organizational health part. People are good at going after the performance and operational success, but they got to be equally excited going after pushing. How do I improve my organizational health? So again, I have an entire plant full of problem solvers and eliminators.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
versus a few people trying to save the world, in the plant.
I think based on the number of questions here that we should probably post afterwards a list of some of your top articles, Klaus,
Sure.
about driving cultural change, because you have some great suggestions there. And as you say, it's not a quick process, but I think that is the root.
Yeah, they're
Not
they're all the same price. They're free.
Well, I will get that list from you and then I will post it to this group afterward.
Sure.
I have an interesting question from someone who's wondering if the jobs that have been cost as a result of COVID, won't that balance out by the ones that are created as business changes? Do you think it'll be a net, or do you think it'll just look so different that we don't know?
All right. So if I understand the question correctly, you're saying are there going to be enough new jobs created to balance
Right,
out the ones that are lost? Okay.
right.
Um, I'd say yes, but not in the short run. There's going to be a lot of people suffering in between there. It's kind of like
Mm,
say if this thing gets worse or stays worse. I mean, the increase in automation is already there. That's even going to accelerate more, I think, because robots don't get sick, right? At least, yeah. and so I think as we get more in machine intelligence and automation and all that, there's different kind of jobs needed. Like, right now, if I had another 1,000 reliability engineers, I could place them across North America. There's just as big a shortage of data scientists, and so on. So I think there is a balance, but there's going to be a time lag in there as to what you can do, because the skill, you can't just transfer one skill to another. So yes, I think that's going to happen. But at the same time, there's going to be a time there where people are going to struggle because they're not going to have all those new skills.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, we still have questions coming in, so I'm going to keep trying to get to them. This is another supply chain question, and it's more specific. So there are some industries where supply chain has been an art, right? And they've really worked hard and they have tight connections. But what about other manufacturing sectors or service industries where there isn't that existing coordination between the supply chain and the consumer? Can we cross-supply some of that knowledge, do you think?
Yeah, I think they're saying, can we learn from there? Sure, but I mean, the key thing is having at least a basic system that works. And we wrote an article, gosh, probably a couple of years ago now, with Phil Slater, who has a lot of books out on supply chain, and give a shout out to Phil over in Australia. And essentially, the data that we published, and I'll say this carefully, was that all the MRO inventory systems and all that stuff, I don't see them as working. It's not getting that much better. It's kind of the nicest way to say it. All the data for somebody that works, I mean, Phil over there works on this full time, and as we look at it, we're saying we don't see the improvements. All the millions spent on all this stuff. We just, yeah, it doesn't mean individual places aren't doing better and there aren't success stories, but on a bigger scale, we're not seeing the successes. So
So then,
I wouldn't get all hung up about, what can I do and learn. It's what should I be doing, and do I get the basics? Do I need to, go in and do your planning and scheduling? Do us, parts rationalization? There's a lot of basic things you can do, and if you do
okay.
those well, you'll be just as well off.
Okay, great. Okay, all right. Um, I'm reading this last question that's just come in. And I think it goes back to a lot of what you've said about this is a lot of work and a lot of very active problem solving to maintain social distancing on the floor. And then how to maintain that, how
Yes.
to sustain that. And I know you've given us a lot of great advice there, but any last thoughts on that?
Yeah, that gets right back to, the comments I made. Why does RCM fail half the time? TPM,
Right.
lean. It's back to what are you doing, and whether it's a KPI, a process, you have to have a change model. And when
Mm-hmm.
you have a change model, there's some key things that you have to do. First of all, yeah, you can put a KPI there and then kind of put it at different levels so it makes sense as you go down the organization, kind of called business plan deployment. But when you put that out there, the employee at the lowest level has to look at what needs to get done and say, okay, I understand what they want me to do, and I know what to do different to make a difference. It's not just a number on the wall. So they have to have that understanding, of what needs to get done.
Mm-hmm.
And then the employee has to see the structures in place, evidence that structures are being put in place with the right incentives to support that change or that new behavior that's
Mm-hmm.
required. And then you have to be willing to train the people or educate them to have the skills, the opportunities, so they get confidence, so they know the skills, and saying, okay, they've also helped me become capable so I can do this. And then lastly, your leaders and people on the floor better be following that, because if they're not role modeling it, you're done. So all of those have to work together, and it gets back to that continuous improvement. How do you mentor and coach on a daily basis teams out on the floor? And those that really understand lean know that it's a forever job. And
Yes.
you have teams out there that ask questions every day. They don't say go do this because it's your standardized work. They ask the right questions to develop
Mm-hmm.
more problem solvers. And what are they really doing? Number one, they're bringing everything back to what the best practice is. By developing problem, and at the same time, they're changing the thinking process to develop more problem solvers or eliminators. And
I
that's
think,
what makes lean, whether it's lean, TPM, RCM, this COVID-19 response successful, as having that thriving continuous improvement plan form entering process that's successful?
I think you just answered our last question in the process, so well done. I want to encourage everyone to write down Klaus's email while it's on screen here, kblake@utk.edu, because obviously he is a fantastic reference, and Klaus is active on the speaking circuit, so I'm sure you will get another chance to hear his ongoing thoughts as this situation evolves. As you said, the next 3 or 4 months are going to be pretty pivotal here. If I could get you to forward to the next slide, Klaus. On July 8th, we'll be welcoming Kevin Clark to the same webinar show, and he'll be discussing remote asset management and other benefits of connectivity. And for those of you who know Kevin, he is a staunch proponent of practical connectivity, focusing on connected systems and teams to improve the overall workflow. And how to make that meet business needs. So it'll be more on the digital emphasis versus the cultural. But for those of you who are working through this problem, I think that Kevin's presentation on July 8th will have some additional helpful information. And then if you'll forward one more time, Klaus, when I close the webinar down today, please stay online, everyone. It'll take just a moment, and then you'll see the survey link appear. So we would greatly appreciate it if you could take a few moments to complete the survey, because your feedback will help us keep the webinar content relevant and helpful to you. And then if obviously everyone who completes the survey will receive a copy of today's presentation. And also during the survey, you'll see a question about receiving a certificate of attendance. So if you want that, answer yes to that question, and we will follow up with a certificate for you. This recorded webinar will be available on excelix.com within a day or two. And that is it for today. So thank you very much, Klaus. This was such a pleasure.
Well, thank you, everybody, and be safe.
Indeed, indeed. All right, thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon, and we will see you next time.